What if everything you've been told about friendship and happiness is only half the truth? What if true peace after 70 isn't about holding on to more people, but about learning to let go? Today, we'll explore how Buddhist wisdom reveals the unexpected key to fulfillment: solitude, self-awareness, and inner peace. You don't need friends after 70, not in the way you once did. In fact, friendships, once the cornerstone of your social life, may become less essential as you age. This isn't about isolation or rejecting companionship. It's about understanding that the pursuit of constant social connection may no longer serve you in the way it once did. Life is a journey of detachment, and as we grow older, we begin to see that true fulfillment doesn't come from maintaining countless friendships, but from cultivating inner peace. You no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. For much of our lives, we are conditioned to seek validation. In youth, we chase success, recognition, and approval, using friendships as a measure of our worth. Being surrounded by people made us feel wanted, important, relevant. But at 70, something shifts. There's no longer a need to impress, no need to be liked, no need to seek approval. The Buddha taught that external validation leads to suffering because it makes happiness dependent on things outside ourselves. True peace is found within. Consider Harold, who spent decades building his career, surrounded by colleagues and acquaintances. He believed his social connections defined his worth. When he retired, many of those relationships faded, and at first, he fought to maintain them. But then he realized, why chase friendships that were never built on deep connection? He turned inward, focusing on hobbies, mindfulness, and his own company. The silence that once felt like a void became a source of serenity. He no longer needed an audience to feel validated. He had become his own source of fulfillment. Peace becomes more valuable than socializing. Society glorifies being busy, being surrounded by people, being constantly engaged. But as we grow older, we begin to understand that stillness is not emptiness, it is richness. There is a Buddhist parable about a man carrying a heavy sack of stones. When the Buddha asked why, the man replied, "Because I always have." The Buddha simply said, "Then put it down." Friendships, too, can become burdens when they are maintained out of obligation rather than joy. Margaret was once the center of every gathering, always answering calls, always attending events. But as the years passed, she noticed something. Socializing drained her rather than enriched her. Conversations felt repetitive, interactions felt forced. One evening, after yet another dinner where nothing meaningful was said, she asked herself, "Why am I doing this?" Was it out of joy or out of habit? She made a choice. She stopped forcing social obligations upon herself. She embraced solitude. At first, it felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But then she began to notice things: the beauty of a sunrise, the peace in reading uninterrupted, the way the world moved when she was simply still. She realized that prioritizing her own peace wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Fewer friendships mean fewer disappointments. One of the hardest truths of life is that not all friendships are meant to last. Over the decades, we experience betrayals, fading connections, and one-sided relationships. At 70, we see that fewer friendships don't just mean fewer obligations, they mean fewer disappointments. Relationships, no matter how strong, come with expectations, and expectations, when unmet, lead to suffering. William, now 78, learned this lesson. He spent years nurturing friendships, always being the one to reach out, to check in, to offer support. But as time went on, many of those friendships faded, not because of conflict, but because people changed, drifted apart. For a long time, he felt hurt, abandoned. Then he realized, was he valuing the quality of his relationships, or just their duration? He stopped chasing friendships that had already run their course and started investing in the few that truly mattered. He let go of resentment, of expectation, of the idea that every friendship must last forever. The Buddha teaches that attachment creates suffering, and William saw that the more he let go, the lighter he felt. Your time becomes more precious. When we are young, time feels infinite. We spend it freely without thought. But as we age, we realize that time is our most valuable resource. Every moment becomes something to cherish, not waste. Richard, in his early 80s, once believed that an active social life was the key to happiness. He attended every event, accepted every invitation. But he began to feel exhausted. Conversations felt empty. Gatherings felt like obligations. Then one day he asked himself, "Is this how I want to spend my time?" The answer was no. He made a change. Instead of filling his days with social obligations, he started investing his time in things that truly enriched his life. He rekindled his passion for painting. He took long walks without distraction. He sat in silence, drinking tea, watching the world unfold around him. One evening, he was invited to a dinner party. He politely declined, choosing instead to sit on his porch, watching the sunset. And as he watched the sky shift colors, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He remembered the Buddha's words, "The trouble is, you think you have time, but time is running out," and he wanted to spend every moment of it in a way that truly mattered. True companionship comes from within. Many fear that letting go of friendships means facing loneliness. But there is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. Ilona, at 76, had spent most of her life surrounded by people. Yet despite always being engaged, she often felt empty. Then one day, at a gathering, she realized something. She was surrounded by people, yet she felt alone. That night, she made a choice. She stopped seeking connection just to avoid solitude. She embraced being alone. And as she spent more time in her own company, something changed. She discovered a new rhythm. Long walks where she truly noticed the world, afternoons filled with quiet joy, evenings of deep reflection. She no longer needed to be around people to feel complete. She was already whole. The Buddha said, "If you are quiet enough, you will hear the flow of the universe." Ilona finally understood. She was never alone. She had herself, and that was enough. Letting go opens the door to true freedom. The greatest gift of aging is the ability to release what no longer serves us. James spent years believing that staying socially active was the key to happiness. He forced himself to maintain friendships, to show up, to stay engaged. But one evening, at a crowded restaurant, he looked around at the familiar faces and felt nothing. That night, he made a decision. He would no longer force himself to maintain friendships that felt hollow. He would no longer stay in spaces that drained him. Instead, he would prioritize what truly mattered. At first, it was difficult. Saying no felt unnatural. But then he realized no one really noticed. Life carried on. And for the first time in years, he felt free. He spent his days in ways that brought him joy. Morning walks, quiet afternoons, the simplicity of being. The Buddha said, "You only lose what you cling to." And James understood. When you stop clinging to friendships out of obligation, you create space for something even greater. Freedom. At 70 and beyond, friendships no longer define us. We are no longer bound by expectations, by social norms, by the fear of loneliness. Instead, we enter the most profound chapter of life, a chapter of peace, of self-awareness, of true fulfillment. The answer to happiness has never been outside of you. It has always been within. And as the Buddha wisely taught, be a light unto yourself.